Story 1. I once saw someone pick up a rock and throw it as hard as he could at a moving train. He was laughing as he went up close to the train before he threw it. The rock ricocheted back and went straight into his shoulder. The guy went flying backward and dropped to the ground, holding his shoulder as though he had been shot, and then ran towards the medical clinic, screaming the whole time. Story 2. I was working in a machine shop, and Freddie wasn't paying attention to what he was doing and drilled right through his hand with a drill press. We called an ambulance and wrapped clean rags around his hand, then waited for the paramedics. While waiting, the bloodborne pathogens team cleaned up the drill press. We still had work to do, so another coworker got the parts and started using the drill press. He was almost done with the job and began joking around, saying, "Hey look, I'm Freddie, and I'm going to drill my hand." Sure enough, he slipped and drilled right through his own hand. We had to call the ambulance back to take care of him. Story 3. Back when I worked on a farm a few years ago, the owner made his new wife the farm manager. She read somewhere that chemicals were bad for plants and soil, so she refused to let us use necessary chemicals to get the field ready for cropping. We had the worst, most infested winter wheat I had ever seen that year. The next year, she demanded that I add nitrate to everything, even the perennial gardens, which just ruined most of the herbs. Over the course of just over 4 years, I saw that farm go from making about $100,000 profit a year in crops and another $50,000 in equipment rental to going completely bankrupt. Story 4. I've told this story here before, but here it goes. I'm a retired paramedic, and one night years ago, we got a call for a 20-something-year-old with cardiac symptoms. Based on the area we worked, this generally means cocaine or crack-induced chest pain. We arrive at a terrible little single-room occupancy building and are directed up to the second floor. Our patient is crawling towards us and, upon seeing us, yells, "Get me a priest!" My skepticism meter is ringing at full volume, but all the other residents are coming out to see what's happening. So we carry him down to the ambulance to evaluate him. I ask his medical history, and he says a multisyllable word that I hadn't heard since medic school. Oh. I clearly remember thinking, we put him on the monitor and he's in atrial fibrillation, not a good heart rhythm, not the worst, but weird for someone so young, at about 180 beats per minute, entirely too fast. We get an intravenous line, give a drug called amiodarone with a bunch of fluids, and the dude perks back up pretty quickly. We ask him what he was doing when his symptoms started. This proved to be a mistake, as it did incalculable psychic damage to my partner and me. He explains that he has been in and out of the hospital all week. The first time he went in was for the exact same thing. Upon discharge, he asked the doctor how to prevent this from happening again. The doctor gives a basic answer of don't do drugs, limit caffeine, no nicotine, drink plenty of water, light exercise, good diet, etc. The guy gets home and can only remember that the doctor said to drink lots of water. He downs almost 3 gallons of water before his salt levels are relatively so low that he calls 911 again. Upon discharge the second time, he asks the same doctor how to avoid this happening again. The doctor, who I'm sure was dumbfounded, tells him something along the lines of, "Don't chug 3 gallons of water." Upon getting home, he remembers the doctor as having said not to drink water. 2 and a few days later, we get the call because he has not had a drop of any fluids since his hospital discharge. We take him back to the same hospital for the third time, and the triage nurse immediately sprints up to us asking what brings him in this time. She was impressed but not surprised to learn why. Story 5. Camping in high school, weather wasn't great, but we watched someone try to light their fire, and they were struggling. Okay, so they grabbed a big can of white naphtha. I figured, okay, they'll pour a bit on and throw a match. Not bad. Nope, they poured the whole gallon on. This should be fun to watch. They struck a match and then reached in to light it. So a bunch of us ran over to put him out and make sure he was okay. He lost his eyebrows and a good amount of hair, but overall he was surprisingly okay. Story 6. I used to work at Kentucky Fried Chicken, and this guy wanted to go through the drive-thru. He was in a large van with an extension on the roof. For some context, the speaker was outside, not sheltered like the window. I told him his van wouldn't fit, but he wasn't having any of it. I had closed-circuit television on the speaker, and I could see that he wasn't going to fit. I told him he was about 3 inches too tall and to just park up, come inside, and order. This guy got out of his van and proceeded to vent air from his tires until they were basically flat. My manager, one of the cooks, and I watched this guy over the space of about 10 minutes empty all the air from his tires in complete disbelief. He then tried to drive but could not control his van and was damaging his tires. He then blocked the drive-through for about an hour because he couldn't go anywhere. My manager was so mad that he had to help the guy push his van out of the drive-through. They waited for the Automobile Association for about an hour as well because the guy didn't have a pump or anything. From then on, whenever someone did something stupid, we were always like, yeah, but at least you're not van guy. Story 7. Neighborhood bully and his 2 friends caught 13-year-old me in the woods and took my pellet gun. They stated it was a cheap piece of junk and couldn't hurt anything and wouldn't even go through a shoe. I have no idea why he believed or even said this. He proceeded to shoot himself through his shoe into his big toe with the pellet lodged under his toenail. I thought for sure he would beat me up, but his friend laughed and called him a dumb fool, gave me my pellet gun back, and I left. Story 8. My high school anatomy class had an incident. We did a lot of dissections. That day we had deer hearts. I went to school in a rural area, and the country boys were excited to share hunting stories and began to continuously one-up each other. One kid said that he put blood all over his face on his first hunt, which is probably true as it's a common tradition with deer hunting. Another kid said that his dad made him drink the blood. This one guy, who was really good-looking but not very smart, bragged that when he went hunting, he would field dress the deer and eat the heart raw. The other kids were skeptical, and one of them said that if he was telling the truth, he should prove it and eat the deer heart on their lab table. With zero hesitation, he grabbed it, bit off a chunk, and swallowed it whole. But these hearts were already soaked in formaldehyde and preservatives. He started vomiting almost instantly. Our anatomy teacher didn't even flinch. She just rolled her eyes and sent him to the nurse. Story 9. Way back in the day, a friend of mine asked me if his best friend's girlfriend could live in my spare bedroom until they could get married. Church people. So, like an idiot, I agreed. What followed was a long string of really stupid stuff on her part. Foolishness like opening all the windows to fight the air conditioning if it got too cool, instead of adjusting the thermostat. But the kicker was when I overheard her bragging to a friend. She said I didn't have to pay rent until I got a job, so I'm not even looking. And I'm thinking, you're a loud talker, and you know I'm in the next room. Story 10. Bobby in 2nd grade stapled his finger straight in and blood spurted out. He was rushed out by the teacher to the doctors. The next day he comes into class with a bandaged finger. We asked him if it hurt. He says no. Then someone dares him to do it again to prove it didn't hurt. Old Bobby, never one to shy away from a challenge, grabbed the stapler and slammed it down on his thumb. The staple stuck in and blood poured out. He screamed, and back to the emergency room he went. Bobby was not very smart. Story 11. I was delivering pizza during the winter one day and got flagged down by a girl and her friends who had gotten stuck. She did this by jumping in front of my car on the slippery hill she had just slid off of. Upon getting out to help, I observed that they had plowed straight into the corner, were hung up on a big rock, one was buried in mud and snow, the other not even touching the ground. Then, the girl who had flagged me down uttered words that still ring in my head. I don't understand the physics of what's going on here. I tried to explain, but she still insisted we try to push them out. So I made a show of attempting it. The car obviously didn't budge. When that didn't work, she insisted I pull a tow rope out of nowhere and pull her out using my car. A subcompact Scion XA. That thing didn't even take 4 quarts of oil in an oil change. Felt like it was topping out with 3 friends riding in it. Again, I tried to explain how impossible her request was and once again offered to call a tow truck, which she once again refused. It was then that she revealed that she had sent another one of their friends off on foot to look for help during the winter on slippery back roads in the middle of nowhere. They didn't even know where they were. I ended up leaving and calling the police to help find her friend and make them get towed out. Story 12. I worked at a hardware store. Someone came in complaining that the hose for their toilet wasn't working properly, and we sold them something defective. It just wasn't delivering water. The customer thought the hose was too long, so he tied a knot in it. There were two massive kinks in the hose. He was so embarrassed when that was pointed out that he left the hose. Story 13. Worked at a baseball park. Some kid trashed our public bathroom one night, smashing skylights and kicking in stall doors, then tried to drive in the muddy grass behind our ball field. He got his truck stuck and then abandoned it, only to come back the next day with his parents in a much smaller car. They tried to drive their much smaller car all the way out to the stuck truck, got stuck, and had no choice but to call a tow truck. We arrive at the park the next day, and there are two flatbed trucks and several police. Found out the kid was underage drinking, tried to drive out with his girlfriend to have sex in the truck where they got stuck. Parents tried to drive out there in an attempt to pull the truck free. Parents get fined for illegal parking. Kid gets arrested for vandalism, underage drinking, driving while intoxicated, and illegal parking. We are stuck with cleaning it all up. Probably not the most moronic thing I've seen, but it's what comes to mind. Story 14. Does it count if I witnessed the aftermath? A paramedic was dispatched to a concert at a local festival venue, and the dispatch was vague. It sounded like a possible alcohol poisoning, but maybe there was more than one case. Anyway, I got there, and it was chaos. I ended up needing about 20 different ambulances. People had pre-gamed hard. There were drunks, overdoses, a couple of fights, etc. It was all topped by my guy. A dad found drugs on his son and his son's friends. He told them, "Drugs will ruin your life, and you won't even enjoy it. Watch," and took them. We got him back after about 45 minutes of resuscitation efforts between the scene and the hospital. He survived and was discharged home not too long later, so he at least lived, but a lot of kids are traumatized and messed up now. Story 15. My most recent ex wanted to make dinner. She tried to direct me to make the decision for her, but she eventually settled on one of those soup-in-a-bag situations. For background, I usually did all the cooking. I left the kitchen to let her at it while I had other things to do around the house. I came back in about 10 minutes to grab a beer and saw that she had gotten my 8-quart Instant Pot out, boiled about 8 quarts of water, and thrown the soup mix in. I saw it and it looked pretty anemic as a soup. I looked at the instructions and saw her mistake. I asked if she followed the recipe. She said she did, to the letter. The instructions were, boil 8 cups of water, put mix in and boil for 20 minutes, and soup. I asked her why she used quarts instead of cups. She denied it and still said, I followed the instructions exactly. I pointed out that she was using 8 quarts of water rather than cups. She then said, I didn't know there was a difference between cups and quarts. She is in her mid-30s. We had cup measuring things. We had the internet. I was just so dumbfounded. The lying and the incompetence. Couldn't believe it. Story 16. I once worked with a guy who said with complete sincerity, "Isn't it amazing how when you get out disposable gloves, you always get a left and a right one?" Among this guy's other accolades were mopping an industrial kitchen bug zapper while it was switched on, throwing away huge stacks of plates because there were too many to wash. We had received a delivery of new plates that same morning. Cleaning the commercial-grade dishwasher by throwing in half a liter of dishwashing liquid and switching it on, which filled the entire back of the restaurant with bubbles from floor to ceiling. Story 17, 2 stories, same shop, same guy. A scenic shop making haunted houses around the country has a 5-gallon bucket of paint kept for the sole purpose of being a prank. When it's opened, it smells so foul it clears out the building with both roll-up doors open, one on each end. It's a joke to make the new guy open it. A guy grabs a cardboard tube, shoves it in the paint, and yells, "Look, it's a straw." He puts his mouth around the other end, and the paint comes spraying out around his mouth. He actually sucked the paint up. He vomited everywhere and ran out of the shop. After he recovered, we made him clean everything up and then dispose of the paint. We needed whiskey barrels, so we went to a brewery to get old retired barrels. While taking them out of the semi-trailer, we discovered one was full. We popped the bunghole, and this gray sludgy liquid came out. It smells of alcohol, but something didn't seem right. The guy fills a bottle up with the stuff and says he's getting drunk tonight, We warn him not to drink it. I don't know the result, as he never showed up to work ever again and never answered his phone even months later. Story 18. I live in Canada for context. Went shopping with my mom once, and in the line ahead of us was an American woman who asked if she could pay in United States dollars. The clerk said yes and brought out a calculator. Then the American woman asked if she'd get change in United States dollars, and the answer was obviously no. She got angry at the staff because they didn't carry United States dollars and refused to buy anything because, what's the point? I want some cash for when I get back in the United States. In Canada, we have our own currency, and most places outside the airport or border crossings don't carry United States dollars.